Chapter 26. Not like the others. That night they feasted, although Rowan could not dig up an appetite, no matter how deep he mined. Goddard ate enough for everyone. He was invigorated by the day's hunt, like a vampire sucking in the life force of its victims. He was more charming, more suave than ever, saying things to make everyone laugh. How easy, thought Rowan, to fall in with him, to be stroked into his Scythe club, just as the others had been. Clearly, Chomsky and Rand were cut from a similar cloth as Goddard. They held not the slightest illusion of conscience, but unlike Goddard, they held no delusions of grandeur. They gleaned for sport, for the joy of it, and as Scythe Rand so accurately put it, because they can. They were more than happy to wield their weapons while Goddard inhabited his role as the Angel of Death. Rowan couldn't be sure if the man believed it, or if it was all artifice, theatricality to add flair to the show. Scythe Bota, though, was different. Yes, he stormed the office building and gleaned his share, just as the others had, but he said little as their god machine carried them home across the sky. And now, at dinner, he barely touched the food on his plate. He kept getting up to wash his hands. He probably thought nobody noticed, but Rowan did, and so did Esme. Scythe Volta is always cranky after a gleaning. Esme leaned over to tell Rowan. Don't stare at him, or he'll throw something at you. Halfway through dinner, Goddard asked for a final count. We gleaned 263, Rand told him. We're ahead of our quota now. We'll have to glean fewer next time. Goddard slammed his fist down on the table in disgust. The damn quota holds us all. If it weren't for the quota, every day could be like today. Then Goddard turned to Scythe Volta and asked how his task was coming. It was Volta's job to set appointments with the families of the deceased, so that they could be granted obligatory immunity. I've spent the whole day reaching out to each family, Volta said. They'll be lining up at the outer gate first thing tomorrow morning. We should let them onto the grounds, Goddard said with a smirk. They can watch Rowan train on the lawn. I hate the bereaved, Rand said, as she stabbed a fresh piece of meat with her fork and dragged it to her plate. They always have a shuffle or a legion. My wrinkle always reeks after an hour of granting bereavement immunity. Unable to stomach any more, Rowan excused himself. I promised Esme I'd play cards with her after dinner, and it's getting late. There was no truth in that, but he threw a glance to Esme, and she nodded, pleased to be part of an impromptu conspiracy. But you'll miss the creme brulee, said Goddard. More for us, said Chomsky, shoving a forkful of prime rib into his mouth. Rowan and Esme went to the game room and played gin rummy, mercifully undisturbed by talk of gleaning and quotas and the kissing of rings. Rowan was thankful that the Suicide King held the monopoly on misery in this room. We should get others to join us, Esme suggested. Then we can play Hearts of Spades. You can play those games with just two. I have no interest in playing cards with the Scythes, Rowan told her flatly. Not them, silly. I mean the servants. She picked up his discarded 9, the second one he fed to her, as if he didn't know she was collecting them. Letting her win today was payment for helping him escape the dining room. I play cards with the Pullman's son sometimes, she told him, but they don't like me very much on account of this used to be their house. Now they all share a room in the servants' quarters. Then she added, You're sleeping in one of their rooms, you know, so I'll bet they don't like you much either. I'm sure they don't like any of us. Probably not. Maybe it was because Esme was young, but she seemed entirely oblivious to the things that weighed so heavily on Rowan. Perhaps she knew better than to question things, or to pass judgment on what she saw. She accepted her situation at face value, and never spoke ill of her benefactor, or more accurately, her captor, for she was clearly Goddard's prisoner, even though she might not see it that way. Hers was a gilded cage, but it was a cage nonetheless. Still, her ignorance was her bliss, and Rowan decided not to shatter her illusion that she was free. Rowan picked up an ace, which he needed for his hand, but discarded it anyways. Does Goddard ever talk to you? He asked Esme. Of course he talks to me, she said. He's always asking me how I am, and if there's anything I need. And if there is, he always makes sure I get it. Just last week, I asked for a... No, not that kind of talking, said Rowan, cutting her off. I mean real talking. Has he ever hinted as to why you matter so much to him? Esme didn't answer. Instead, she laid down her cards, 9s over 3s. Rummy, she said. Loser shuffles. Rowan gathered the cards. Scythe Goddard must have had a good reason to let you live and to grant you immunity. Aren't you at all curious? Esme shrugged and stayed tight-lipped. It was only after Rowan dealt the next hand that she said, Actually, Scythe Goddard didn't grant me immunity. He can claim me anytime he wants, but he doesn't. Then she smiled. That makes me even more special, don't you think? They played 4 games. 1, Esme won fair and square. 2, Rowan let her win. And 1, Rowan won, so it wouldn't be as obvious that he had thrown the others. By the time they were done, dinner had broken up and the others were going about their particular evening routines. Rowan avoided everyone and tried to go straight to his room, but on his way he heard something that gave him pause. There was a faint sobbing coming from Scythe Bolter's room. He listened at the door to make sure it wasn't his imagination, then turned and off. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open slightly and peered inside. Scythe Bolter was there, sitting on his bed, head in hands. His body heaved with sobs that he tried to stifle, but could not. It was a few moments before he looked up and saw Rowan. Bolter's sorrow instantly turned to fury. Who the hell said you could come in here? Get out! He grabbed the nearest object, a glass paperweight, and hurled it at Rowan, just as Esme had suggested he might. It would have left a pretty nasty gash on Rowan's head had it connected, but Rowan ducked and the thing hit the door, leaving a substantial dent in the wood instead of in Rowan's skull. Rowan could have retreated. That probably would have been the most judicious course of action, but living well enough alone was not Rowan's strong point. He was notoriously skilled at sticking his nose where it didn't belong. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, preparing to dodge the next blunt object hurled his way. You have to be quieter if you don't want anyone to hear you, he told Bolter. If you tell anyone, I will make your life a living hell. Rowan laughed at that, because it implied his life wasn't already that. You think that's funny? I'll show you funny. Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. I wasn't laughing at you, if that's what you think. Since Bolter was no longer throwing things and wasn't chasing him out, Rowan grabbed a chair and sat down, far enough away to give Bolter some space. Today was hard, Rowan said. I don't blame you. What do you know about it? Snapped Bolter. I know you're not like the others, said Rowan. Not really. Bolter looked up at him. Then his eyes red from tears that he didn't try to hide anymore. There's something wrong with me, you mean? Bolter looked down again, clenching his fists. But Rowan didn't move because he didn't expect to get a beating. He suspected that Bolter would use his own fists against himself if he could. Scythe Goddard is the future, Bolter said. I don't want to be part of the past, don't you understand? But you hated it today, didn't you? Even more than me, because you weren't just watching, you were a part of it. And you'll be part of it soon too. Maybe not, said Rowan. Oh, you will be. The moment you get your ring and kill that pretty little girlfriend of yours, you'll know there's no turning back for you either. Rowan swallowed, trying to fight down what little bit of dinner he had eaten. Cytra's face bloomed in his mind, but he pushed the image away. He couldn't let himself think about her now. Rowan knew he was out on a limb with Bolter. The only thing to do was see me to its precarious end. You only pretend to like cleaning, he said to Bolter, but you hate it more than you've ever hated anything. Your mentor was Scythe Nero, right? He's very old school, which means he chose you for your conscience. You don't want to take a life, and you definitely don't want to take dozens upon dozens at a time. Bolter leaped up, moving faster than seemed possible. He lifted Rowan up and pushed him against the wall with a bruising slam that made Rowan sorely miss his pain-killing nanites. You will never repeat that to anyone, do you hear me? I've come too far to have my position jeopardized. I won't be blackmailed by a snot-nosed apprentice. Is that what you think I'm doing? Blackmailing you? Don't toy with me, growled Bolter. I know why you're here. Rowan was genuinely disappointed. I thought you knew me. A moment more, and Bolter loosened his grip. Nobody knows anyone, do they? He said. I promise I won't tell anyone, and I don't want anything from you. Bolter finally backed off. I'm sorry. After you've been surrounded by so much screaming, you start to think that's how everyone plays. He sat back down on the bed. I believe you because I know you're better than that. In fact, I knew from the moment Goddard brought you in. He sees you as a challenge because if he can turn one of Faraday's apprentices to his way of thinking, it proves he can turn anyone. Then it occurred to Rowan that Volta wasn't all that much older than him. He had always been in the confidence that made him seem older, but now his vulnerability revealed the truth. He was 20 at most, which meant he'd only been a Scythe for a couple of years. Rowan didn't know the path that led him from an old guard Scythe to Goddard, but he could imagine. He could see how a junior Scythe might gravitate toward Goddard's flash and charisma. After all, Goddard promised his disciples anything a human heart could desire, in exchange for the complete abdication of one's conscience. In a profession where a conscience was a liability, who would want one? Rowan sat down again and pulled his chair close enough to Bolta to whisper, I'll tell you what I think, Rowan said. Goddard isn't a Scythe, he's a killer. It was the first time Rowan dared to say it out loud. There's a lot written about killers from the Mortal Age, monsters like Jack the Ripper, or Charlie Manson, or Cyber Sally, and the only difference between them and Goddard is that people let Goddard get away with it. The mortals knew how wrong it was, but somehow we've forgotten. Yeah, but even if that's true, what can anyone do about it? Asked Bolta. The future comes whether we want it to or not. Randall Chomsky and the dozens of other sick, twisted bastards longing to be in Goddard's inner circle are going to dominate that future. I'm sure the founding Scythes must be rolling in their graves, but the point is, they are in their graves, and they're not coming back anytime soon. Bolta took a deep breath and wiped the last of his tears. For your sake, Rowan, I hope you come to love killing as much as Goddard does. It would make your life so much easier, so much more rewarding. The suggestion weighed heavily on him. A month ago, Rowan would have denied that he could ever become such a monster, but now he wasn't so sure. The pressure to surrender was greater every day. He had to hope that if Bolta had never truly surrendered to the darkness, then maybe he might stand a chance as well. There is no official media coverage of gleanings, much to the chagrin of the more publicity-minded sites. Not even large-scale gleanings gets on the news. Even so, plenty of personal pictures and videos of gleanings are uploaded to the Thunderhead, providing a guerrilla record, which is so much more exciting and enticing than anything official. Notoriety and infamy quickly evolve into celebrity and fame for sites, and the most brazen acts harden further into legend. Some sites find this fame addictive and seek greater and greater celebrity. Others would rather remain anonymous. I cannot deny that I am a legend, not for the simple gleanings I do now, but for the audacious ones I did more than 150 years ago. As if I weren't already immortal enough, I am further immortalized on collectible cards. The newer ones are prized by school children. The older ones are worth a fortune to hardcore collectors, regardless of the condition. I am legend, yet every day I wish that I was not. From the Gleaning Journal of Honorable Scythe Kure. Chapter 27. Harvest Conclave. Scythe's secret investigation led to some surprises she couldn't wait to share with Rowan when she finally saw him at Harvest Conclave. She certainly couldn't share them with Scythe Kure. The two had come to trust each other, and the Scythe would have seen Scythe secretly using her online credentials as a flagrant violation of that trust. Scythe's life had taken a very different turn from Rowan's. She did not attend loud, lavish parties, nor did she train against live subjects. She helped cook quiet meals for heartbroken families, and sparred with a black belt vocator bot. She created tinctures and studied the practical use of deadly poisons inside Curie's personal apothecary and toxic herb garden. She learned about all the infamous acts of both the best and the worst Scythes in history. In the past, it was usually laziness, prejudice, or lack of foresight that made a bad Scythe, Citra had discovered. There were those who seemed to claim too many neighbors because they couldn't be bothered to look further. There were those who, in spite of repeated disciplinary action, would clean people with specific ethnic traits. As for poor judgment, there were plenty of examples there as well, such as Scythe Sartor, who thought it was a good idea to do all of his cleanings at rodeos, thereby destroying the sport entirely, since no one would attend a rodeo for fear of being cleaned. Of course, the bad Scythes weren't all in the past, but instead of bad, they were now called innovative and forward-thinking, like the innovated bloodbaths of Scythe Goddard and his killer cronies. The mass cleaning at Magnetic Propulsion Laboratory, although never reported officially, was big news, and there were plenty of private videos uploaded to the Thunderhead showing Goddard and his disciples doling out immunity like bread to the poor. Rowan was right there in the middle of it. Citra didn't know what to think about that. The world has a talent for rewarding bad behavior with stardom, Scythe Curie said, as she viewed some of the videos that had been uploaded. Then she got a bit pensive. I know the pitfalls of being a celebrity, Scythe, she confessed, although Citra really knew. I was headstrong and stupid in my early days. I thought that by cleaning just the right people at just the right time, I could change the world for the better. I believed, in my arrogance, that I had a keen grasp of the big picture that others lacked. But of course, I was just as limited as anyone else. When I cleaned the president and his cabinet, it shook the world, but the world was already shaking just fine without me. They called me Miss Massacre, and as time went on, that changed to the Grand Dame of Death. I spent more than 100 years trying to fade into anonymity, but even the youngest of children know of me. I am the boogeyman parents use to get their children to behave. Be good or the Grand Dame will get you, Scythe Curie shook her head sadly. Most celebrity is fleeting, but when you're a Scythe, your defining deeds stand forever. Take my advice, Citra, and remain undefined. You might be a celebrity Scythe, Citra pointed out, but even at your worst, you were nothing like Goddard. No, I wasn't, thank goodness, Scythe Curie said. I never took life for sport. You see, there are some who seek celebrity to change the world, and others who seek it to ensnare the world. Goddard is of the second kind. And then she said something that guaranteed Citra many a sleepless night. I wouldn't trust your friend Rowan anymore. Goddard is as corrosive as acid hurled in the eye. The kindest thing you can do is win that ring when Winter Conclave comes and clean the boy quickly, before that acid burns any deeper than it already has. Citra was glad that Winter Conclave was still months away. It was Harvest Conclave she had to worry about. At first, Citra had looked forward to September and the Harvest Conclave, but as it approached, she began to dread it. It wasn't the upcoming test that troubled her. She felt she was prepared for whatever trials would be thrown at the apprentices. What she dreaded was seeing Rowan, because she had no idea what all these months with Goddard had done to him. Win that ring and clean him quickly, Scythe Curie had said. Well, Citra didn't have to worry about that now. She had 4 more months until that decision would be made. But the clock never stopped ticking. It moved inexorably toward one of their deaths. Harvest Conclave took place on a clear but blustery September day. While a storm had kept many spectators away from the last conclave, they gathered in force today on the street before the Fulcrum City Capitol building. Even more peace officers than before were posted to keep the gawking crowds back. Some Scythes, mostly the old guard ones, arrived on foot, choosing a humble walk from their hotels over a more flashy rival. Others pulled up in high-end cars, choosing to make the most of their celebrity status. New crews aimed their cameras but mostly kept their distance. This was, after all, not a red carpet. No questions, no interviews. But there was certainly a lot of preening. Scythe waved to the cameras and squared their shoulders, standing tall so they'd look their best on screen. Scythe Goddard and his crew showed up in a limousine, royal blue studded with mock diamonds, just in case there was any question as to who was inside. As Goddard and his entourage emerged, the crowd wooed and ahed as if their dazzling appearance rivaled a display of fireworks. There he is! It's him! He's so handsome! He's so scary! He's so well groomed! Goddard took a moment to turn to the crowd and sweep his hand in a royal wave. Then he focused on one girl from the audience, held her gaze, pointed at her, then continued on up the stairs, saying nothing. He's so strange. He's so mysterious. He's so charming. As for the girl he singled out, she was left impressed and terrified and confused by his momentary attention, which was precisely the intent. So focused was the crowd on Goddard and his colorful entourage, no one much noticed Rowan bringing up the rear as they climbed the steps to the entrance. Goddard's crew weren't the only sights up for the show. Scythe Kierkegaard had a crossbow slung over his shoulder. Not that he had any intention of using it today, it was merely a part of the spectacle. Still, he could have aimed at just about anyone in the audience and taken them out. The knowledge of that made the crowd all the more excited. No one had ever been leaned on the Capitol steps before a conclave, but that didn't mean that it couldn't happen. While most sights approached down the main avenue, Scythe Curry and Scythe made their entrance from a side street, to avoid being the focus of the crowd's attention for as long as possible. As the stately Scythe pushed through the crowd of onlookers, a rumble erupted from the people closest to her. As they realized who it was moving among them, people reached out to touch her silky lavender robe. She endured this as a matter of course, but one man actually grabbed the fabric and she had to slap his hand away. Careful, she said, meeting his eyes. I don't take kindly to the violation of my person. I apologize, Your Honor, said the man. Then he reached for her hand, intent on touching her ring, but she pulled her hand away from him. Don't even think about it. Scythe pushed her way in front of Scythe Curry to help clear a path for her. Maybe we should have taken a limo, Scythe said. At least that way we wouldn't have to fight our way through. That's always been a little too elitist for me, Curry said. As they cleared the crowd, a sudden gust came down the white Capitol steps, catching Scythe Curry's long silver hair and blowing it back like a bridal train, making her look almost mystical. I knew I should have braided it today, she said. As she and Scythe climbed the white marble steps, someone to their left shouted, "We love you!" Scythe Curry stopped and turned, unable to find the speaker, so she addressed them all. Why? She demanded. But now, under her cool scrutiny, no one responded. I could end your existence at any moment. Why love me? Still, no one answered, but the exchange attracted a cameraman who moved forward, getting a little too close. Scythe Curry smacked the camera so hard it wrenched the man's whole body around, and he nearly dropped it. Mind your manners, said the Scythe. Just, Your Honor, sorry, Your Honor. She continued up the steps with Scythe behind her. Hard to imagine that I used to love this attention. Now I'd avoid it entirely if I could. You didn't seem this tense at the last conclave, Scythe noted. That's because I didn't have an apprentice being tested. Instead, I was the one testing other sides' apprentices. A test that Scythe had failed spectacularly, but she didn't feel like bringing that up. Do you know what today's test will be? Scythe asked as they reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the entry vestibule. No, but I do know that it's being administered by Scythe Cervantes, and he tends to be very physically minded. For all I know, he'll have you tilting at windmills. As before, the Scythes greeted one another in the grand rotunda, waiting for the assembly room doors to open. Breakfast was set out on tables in the center of the rotunda, featuring a pyramid of danish that must have taken hours to assemble, but seconds to fall as Scythes carelessly took the lower danish without regard to the ones above. The wait staff scrambled to gather the fallen pastries before they could be ground underfoot. Scythe Curry found it all very amusing. It was foolhardy of the caterer to think that Scythe would leave anything in a state of order. Scythe spotted Junior Scythe Goodall, the girl who had been ordained at the last conclave. She had her robes made by Claude Duclos, one of the world's preeminent fashion designers. It had been a monumental mistake, because today's designers were all about sucking people out of their happy place. Scythe Goodall's orange and blue striped robe made her look more like a circus clown than a scythe. Citra couldn't help but notice how Goddard and his junior Scythes were the center of even more attention than at the Vernal conclave. Although there were a number of Scythes who turned a cold shoulder, even more crowded them, seeking to ingratiate themselves. There are more and more Scythes who think like Goddard, Scythe Curie said quietly to Citra. They've slipped between the cracks like snakes, infiltrating our ranks, supplanting the best of us like weeds. Citra thought about Faraday, a decent Scythe most certainly choked out by the weeds. The killers are rising to power, Scythe Curie said, and if they do, the days of this world will be very dark indeed. It is left to the truly honorable Scythes to stand firm against it. I look forward to the day you join in that fight. Thank you, Your Honor. Citra had no problem fighting the good fight if she became a Scythe. It was the events that would lead up to it that she couldn't bear to consider. Scythe Curie went off to greet several of the old guard Scythes who held true to the founder's ideals. That's when Citra finally spotted Rowan. He didn't bask in the false glow of Goddard. Instead, he was his own little center of attention. He was surrounded by other apprentices, and even a few junior Scythes. They chat, they laughed, and Citra found herself feeling slighted that Rowan hadn't even sought her out. Rowan had, in fact, tried to find her, but by the time Citra entered the rotunda, Rowan had already been set upon by unexpected admirers. Some were envious of his position with Goddard, others were just curious, and others were clearly hoping to attach themselves to his rising star. Political positioning started young in the Scythedom. You were there at that office building, weren't you? One of the other apprentices said, as but one of the new ones at Conclave for the first time. I saw you in the videos. He wasn't there, said another spot. He had Goddard's freaking ring, handing out immunity. Oh, is that even allowed? Rowan shrugged. Goddard said it was, and anyway, it wasn't like I asked him to give me his ring, he just did it. One of the junior Scythes sighed wistfully. Man, he must really like you if he let you do that. The thought that Goddard might actually like him made Rowan uncomfortable, because the things that Goddard liked, Rowan categorically despised. So, what's he like? One girl asked. Like no one I've ever met, Rowan told her. I wish I was his apprentice, said one of the spots, then grimaced like he had just bitten into a rancid cheese tennis. I was taken on by Scythe Mao. Scythe Mao, Rowan knew, was another soap voter, enjoying the celebrity of his public image. He was notoriously independent and didn't align himself with the old guard or the new. Rowan didn't know if he was a man who voted his own conscience or sold his vote to the highest bidder. Faraday would have known. There were so many things Rowan missed about being Faraday's apprentice. The inside scoop was one of them. Goddard and his junior Scythes totally owned the Capitol steps when they came up, said an apprentice Rowan remembered from the last conclave, the one who knew his poisons. They look so good. Have you decided what color you'll be, and what jewels you'll have on your robe? A girl asked, suddenly hanging on his arm like a fast-growing vine. He didn't know which would be more awkward, pulling out of her grip or not. Invisible, Rowan said. I'll come up the State House steps naked. Those will be some jewels, quipped one of the junior Scythes, and everyone laughed. Then Citra pushed her way through, and Rowan felt as if he was caught doing something he shouldn't. Citra, hi, he said. It felt so forced, he just wanted to take it back and find another way to say it. He shrugged out of the vine girl's grip, but it was too late, because Citra had seen it. Looks like you've made a lot of friends, Scythe said. No, not really, he said, then realized he'd just insulted them. All. I mean, we're all friends, right? We're in the same boat. Same boat, repeated Citra with deadpan dullness, but daggers in her eyes as sharp as the ones that used to hang in Faraday's weapons then. Good to see you, Rowan. Then she strode away. Let her go, said the vine girl. She'll be history after the next conclave anyway, right? Rowan didn't even excuse himself as he left them. He cocked up with Citra quickly, which told him she really wasn't trying all that hard to get away. This was a good sign. He gently grabbed her arm, and she turned to him. Hey, he said, I'm sorry about back there. No, I get it, she said. You're a big deal now, you have to flaunt it. It's not like that. Do you think I wanted them fawning all over me like that? Come on, you know me better. Citra hesitated. It's been 4 months, she said. 4 months can change a person. That much was true. But some things hadn't changed. Rowan knew what she wanted to hear, but that would just be another dance, another bit of posturing, so he told her the truth. It's good to see you, Citra, he said, but it hurts to see you. It hurts a lot, and I don't know what to do about it. He could tell that reached her, because her eyes began to glisten with tears that she blinked away before they could spill. I know, I hate that it has to be this way. I'll tell you what, said Rowan. Let's not even think about Winter Conclave right now. Let's be in the here and now and let Winter Conclave take care of itself. Citra nodded. Agreed. Then she took a deep breath. Let's take a walk. There's something I have to show you. They walked along the outer edge of the rotunda, passing the archways where the sides wheeled and diddled. Citra pulled out her phone and projected a series of holograms into her palm, capping it so no one but Rowan could see. I dug this out of the Thunderhead's back brain. How did you do that? Never mind how. What's important is that I did, and what I found. The holograms were of Scythe's Faraday on the streets near his home. These are from his last day, Citra said. I was able to retrace at least some of his steps that day. But why? Just watch. The hologram showed him being led into someone's home. That's the house of the woman he introduced us to at the market. He spent a few hours there. Then he went to this cafe. Citra swiped another video showing him going into the restaurant. I think he may have met someone there, but I don't know who. Okay, said Rowan. So he was saying goodbye to people. So far it seems consistent with the things someone would do if it were their last day on Earth. Citra swiped again. The next video showed him going up the stairs to a train station. This was 5 minutes before he died, Citra said. We know that it happened at that station, but guess what? The camera on that train platform had been vandalized, supposedly by unsavories. It was down for the entire day, so there's no visual record of what actually happened on that platform. A train pulled out of the station. And a moment later, a train pulled in, heading in the other direction. That was the one that killed Faraday. Although Rowan couldn't see it, he grimaced as if he had. You think someone killed him and made it look like he did it himself? Rowan looked around to make sure they weren't being observed and spoke quietly. If that's your only evidence, it's pretty weak. I know, so I kept digging. She swiped back and replayed the scene of Faraday walking toward the station. There were 5 witnesses. I couldn't track them down without digging into the Scythe's records, and if I did that, they'd know I was looking. But it only makes sense that those witnesses would have gone up these stairs too, right? There were 18 people who went up the stairs around the time that Faraday died. Some of them probably got on this first train. She pointed to the train leaving the station. But not all of them. Of those 18 people, I was able to identify about half of them, and 3 of them were granted immunity that very day. It was enough to take the wind out of Rowan and make him feel lightheaded. They were brave to say it was a self-cleaning. If you were just an ordinary citizen and witnessed one Scythe killing another, and then were offered immunity to keep your mouth shut, what would you do? Rowan wanted to believe he'd seek justice, but he thought back to the days before he became an apprentice, when the appearance of a Scythe was the most frightening thing he could imagine. I'd kiss the ring and keep my mouth shut. Across the rotunda, The doors of the conclave chamber opened, and the Scythes began to file in. "Who do you think did it?" Rowan asked. "Who had the most to gain by getting farther out of the picture?" Neither of them needed to say it out loud. They both knew the answer. Rowan knew that Goddard was capable of unthinkable things, but would he kill another Scythe? Rowan shook his head, not wanting to believe it. "That's not the only explanation," he told her. "It might not have even been a Scythe at all. Maybe it was the family member of someone he killed, someone who wanted revenge. Anyone could have taken his ring, pushed him into the path of the train, and used the ring to give immunity to the witnesses. They'd have to stay quiet then, or they'd be considered accomplices." Saitra opened her mouth to refute it, but closed it again. It was possible. Even though using Faraday's ring would have frozen the killer's fingers, it was possible. "I didn't think of that," she said. "Or what about the Tonists? The Tone cults hate Scythes." The rotunda was quickly emptying. They left the alcove and moved toward the chamber doors. "You don't have enough facts to accuse anyone of anything," Rowan said. "You should let it sit for now." "Let it sit? You can't be serious." "I said for now. You'll have full access to the Scythe's records once you're ordained, and you'll be able to prove exactly what happened." Cetra stopped in her tracks. "What do you mean, once I'm ordained? It could just as easily be you. Or is there something I'm missing?" Rowan pursed his lips, furious at himself for the slip. Let's just get inside before they close the doors." The rituals of conclave were just as they had been before. The tolling of the dead, the washing of hands, grievances, and discipline. Once again, an anonymous accusation was leveled against Scythe Goddard, this time accusing him of handing out immunity too freely. "Who brings this accusation?" Goddard demanded. "Let the accuser stand and identify his or herself." Of course, no one took credit, which allowed Goddard to retain the floor. "I will admit that his accusation has merit," Goddard said. "I am a generous man, and have perhaps been too liberal in my doling of immunity. I make no excuses, and am unrepentant. I throw myself on the mercy of the High Blade to levy my punishment." High Blade Xenocrates waved his hand dismissively. Yes, sit down, Goddard. Your penance will be to shut up for a whole 5 minutes." That brought a round of laughter. Goddard bowed to the High Blade and took his seat. And although a few Scythes, including Scythe Curie, tried to object, pointing out that historically, Scythes who overused the ring had their power to grant immunity limited to the families of the glint, their complaints fell on deaf ears. Xenocrates overruled all objections in the interest of speeding up the day's proceedings. "Amazing," said Scythe Curie quietly to Saitra. "Goddard's becoming untouchable. He can get away with anything. I wish someone would have had the foresight to glean him as a child. The world would be better off." Saitra avoided Rowan at lunch, afraid that being seen together more than they already had been might raise suspicion. She stood by Scythe Curie for lunch, and the Scythe introduced Saitra to several of the greatest living Scythes. Scythe Muir, who had once been a delegate to the Global Conclave in Geneva, Scythe Mandela, who was in charge of the Bugling Committee, and Scythe Hideyoshi, the only Scythe known to have mastered the skill of gleaning through hypnosis. Saitra tried not to be too starstruck. Meeting them almost gave her hope that the old guard could triumph against the likes of Goddard. She kept glancing over at Rowan, who, once more, couldn't seem to get away from the other apprentices, although she didn't know how hard he tried. "It's a bad sign," said Scythe Hideyoshi, "when our young hopefuls gravitate so openly to the enemy." "Rowan's not the enemy," Saitra blurted, but Scythe Curie put a hand on her shoulder to quiet her. "He represents the enemy," Scythe Curie said. "At least he does to those other apprentices." Scythe Mandela sighed. "There shouldn't be enemies in the Scythedom. We should all be on the same side, the side of humanity." It was generally agreed among the old guard that these were troubling times, but aside from raising objections that were repeatedly dismissed, no one took action. Saitra found herself getting increasingly anxious after lunch, as the weapons manufacturers tooted their wares and various motions were hotly debated. Things like whether a Scythe's ring should be worn on the left or right hand, and whether or not a Scythe should be allowed to endorse a commercial product, like running shoes or a breakfast cereal. It all seemed insignificant to Scythe. Why should any of that matter when the whole act of cleaning was slowly devolving into mortal age murder? Then, at last, it came time for the apprentice trials. As before, the candidates for Scythe went first, having been tested the night before. Of the 4 candidates who made it through their final test, only 2 were ordained. The other 2 had to suffer the walk of shame, as they exited the chamber and went back to their old lives. Scythe took guilty pleasure at the fact that the girl who had been sucking up to Rowan was one of those ejected. Once the new Scythes were given the rings and took their names, the remaining apprentices were called down front. Today's test, announced Scythe Cervantes, will be a competition in the martial art of Vocator. The candidates will be paired and judged on their performance. A mat was brought in and rolled out in the semicircular space in front of the rostrum. Scythe took a deep breath. She had this. Vocator was a balance among strength, agility, and focus, and she had found her perfect balance, and then they stuck a blade right in the heart of her confidence. Scythe Terranova will spar against Rowan Damisk. A murmur from the crowd. Scythe realized this was no random draw. They were paired intentionally, doomed to be adversaries. How could it be any other way? Her eyes met Rowan's, but his expression gave away nothing. The other matches went first. Each apprentice gave their best, but Vocator was a bruising discipline and not everyone's strength. Some victories were close, others were rout, and then it came time for Scythe and Rowan's match. Still, Rowan's expression gave her neither camaraderie, nor sympathy, nor misery at having to be set against each other. Okay, let's do this, is all he said, and they began to circle each other. Rowan knew that today was his first true test, but not the one they had devised for him. Rowan's test was to look convincing, but still throw the match. Goddard, Xenocrates, Cervantes, and, for that matter, all the sides assembled, needed to believe he was doing his best, but that his best was just not good enough. It began with the ritualistic rhythmic circling, then posturing and physical taunting. Rowan launched himself at Scythe through a kick that he telegraphed with his body language and missed her by a fraction of an inch. He lost his footing and fell down on one knee. A very good start. He turned quickly, rising, remained off balance, and she lunged toward him. He thought she would take him down with an elbow strike, but instead she grabbed him, pulling him forward even as she appeared to push him back. It brought him to balance and made it appear as if her move had failed, that she didn't have the leverage to do the job. Rowan backed away and caught her gaze. She was grinning at him, her eyes intensely on his. It was part of the taunting that Vocator was known for, but this was so much more. He could read her just as clearly as if she were speaking aloud. "You're not going to throw this match," her eyes said. "Fight badly. I dare you, because no matter how poorly you try to fight, I will find a way to make you look good." Frustrated, Rowan launched himself at her again, an open palm struck at her shoulder, intentionally 2 inches off from the perfect leverage point, but she actually moved into it. His palm connected, she spun back with the force of his strike and went down. "Damn you, Scythe, damn you." She could beat him at everything, even at losing. Scythe knew from the moment Rowan made his first kick what he was up to, and it infuriated her. How dare he think he had to fight badly for her to win this match? Had he grown so arrogant under Scythe Goddard that he actually thought this wouldn't be a fair fight? Sure, he had been training, but so had she. So what if he had grown stronger? That also meant he was bulkier and moved slower. A fair fight was the only way to keep their consciences clean. Didn't Rowan realize that by sacrificing himself, he'd be dooming her as well? She would sooner cling herself as her first act as a Scythe than accept his sacrifice. Rowan glared at her now, furious, and it only made her laugh. "Is that the best you can do?" she asked. He threw out a low kick, just slow enough for her to anticipate, and without any force behind it. All she needed to do was lower her stance, and the kick would have no effect. Instead, she responded by raising her center of gravity just enough for the kick to knock her feet out from under her. She fell to the mat, but righted it herself quickly, so it wouldn't look as if she had done it on purpose. Then she threw her shoulder against him and hooked her right leg around his, applying force, but not enough to make his knee buckle. He grabbed her, twisted, flipped them both down to the mat, landing with her in the dominant position over him. She countered by forcing him to roll over and pin her. He tried to release her, but she held his arms in place so he couldn't. "What's the matter, Rowan?" she whispered. "Don't know what to do when you're on top of a girl?" He finally pulled away and she got up. They faced each other one more time, circling in the familiar bottle dance while Cervantes circled them in the other direction like a satellite, completely missing what was really going on between them. Rowan knew the match was almost over. He was about to win, and by winning, he would lose. He must have been crazy thinking Scythe would allow him to willingly throw the match. They both cared too much about each other. That was the problem. Scythe would never willingly accept the Scythe's ring as long as her feelings for him got in the way. And all at once, Rowan knew exactly what he had to do. With only 10 seconds left to the match, all Scythe had to do was keep up the dance. Rowan was clearly the victor. 10 more seconds of guarded circling and Cervantes would blow the whistle. But then Rowan did something Scythe hadn't anticipated at all. He threw himself forward with lightning speed. Not clumsy, not feigning false incompetence, but with perfect, practiced skill. In an instant, he had put her in a headlock, squeezing her neck tight enough for her pain nanites to kick in. And then he leaned close and snarled into her ear. "You fell right into my trap," he said. "Now you get what you deserve." Then he flung her body into the air, twisting her head the other way. Her neck broke with a loud and horrible snap, and darkness came over Scythe like a landslide. Rowan dropped Scythe to the ground as the crowd drew a collective gasp. Cervantes blew his whistle violently. "Illegal move! Illegal move!" Cervantes shouted, just as Rowan knew he would. "Disqualification!" The gathering of Scythes began to roar. Some were furious at Cervantes, others were spouting vitriol at Rowan for what he had done. Rowan stood stoic, letting no emotion show. He forced himself to look down at Scythe's body. Her head was twisted practically backward. Her eyes were open, but no longer seeing. She was dead as could be. He bit down on his tongue until it began to bleed. The chamber door swung open and guards raced in, hurrying toward the deadest girl in the middle of the room. The high blade came up to Rowan. "Go back to your Scythe," he said, not even trying to hide his disgust. "I'm sure he'll discipline you accordingly." "Yes, Your Excellency." Disqualification. None of them realized that, to Rowan, it was the perfect victory. He watched as the guards picked Scythe up and carried her, limp as a sack of potatoes, outside where, no doubt, an ambu drone was already waiting to take her to the nearest revival center. "You'll be fine, Scythe. You'll be back with Scythe Queen in no time. But you won't forget what happened today, and I hope you never forgive me." "I fought against the birds. There are things I've done that I am not proud of, but I am very proud that I fought against that. I can't recall which Scythe began that odious campaign to clean only those who were born mortal, but it spread throughout each regional Scythedom, a viral idea in a post-viral time. Shouldn't those who were born to expect death be the sole subjects of cleaning?" went the popular wisdom. But it was bigotry masquerading as wisdom, selfishness posing as enlightenment, and not enough sides argued, because those born in the post-mortal age found mortal borns to be too uncomfortably different in the way they thought, and in the way they lived their lives. "Let them die with the age that bore them," cried the post-mortal purists in the Scythedom. In the end, it was deemed a gross violation of the second commandment, and all those Scythes who participated in the purge were severely disciplined. But by then, it was too late to undo what had been done. We lost our ancients, we lost our elders, we lost our living lifeline to the past. There are still mortal borns around, but they hide their age and their history for fear of being targeted again. Yes, I fought the purge, but the Thunderhead did not. By its own law of non-interference in Scythe affairs, it could do nothing to stop the purge. All it could do was bear witness. The Thunderhead allowed us to make that costly mistake, leaving the Scythedom to wallow in its own regret to this very day. I often wonder, should the Scythedom run entirely off the rails and decide to glean all of humanity in a grand suicide of global gleaning? Would the Thunderhead break its non-interference law and stop it? Or would it bear witness again as we destroyed ourselves, leaving nothing behind but a living cloud of our knowledge, accomplishments, and so-called wisdom? Would the Thunderhead grieve our passing, I wonder? And if so, would it grieve as the child who has lost a parent, or as the parent who could not save a petulant child from its own poor choices? From the Gleaning Journal of Honorable Scythe.